They said she was far too ugly to be loved, that no man would ever look at her with tenderness. But what if I told you that a lonely farmer, scarred by pain and a past he wished he could forget, saw in that rejected woman a beauty no one else dared to notice, and that this single glance was enough to change both of their destinies forever? Get ready. This is not just a love story. It's proof that when the heart chooses to feel, neither solitude nor judgment can keep love from blooming in the most unexpected places. Elisa had always lived on the fringes. Since childhood, she had felt the weight of contempt. At school, she was the target of laughter for her appearance, and at home, her father rarely spoke a kind word to her, ashamed of the daughter who failed to meet his expectations. With her mother's early death, only loneliness remained. By the age of 7, Elisa already understood that her reflection in the mirror made people uncomfortable. It wasn't just her shyness or unruly hair, it was her hunchback, visible since infancy, that had become her greatest stigma. Her rounded shoulders, forced posture, timid walk, everything about her seemed to scream different, and society did not forgive those who failed to fit the mold. At school, classmates invented cruel nicknames. Little Hunchback was the most common, and every time someone whispered it in the hallway, Elisa felt her heart shrink. It didn't matter how hard she studied, how kind she tried to be, or how much she tried to disappear in the back of the classroom. There was always someone ready to point and laugh. The teacher turned a blind eye, as if the girl's pain wasn't worth noticing. At home, things were even worse. Her father, Joachim, was a stern, silent man, and since his wife had died of a sudden illness, he had grown even more bitter. He saw in Elisa a living reminder of the woman he had lost, but without her sparkle, without her beauty. He rarely praised her or asked about her day. Dinner was eaten in silence, almost always under the dim light of an oil lamp, with only the sound of cutlery filling the empty space between them. At 13, Elisa learned to sew from an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Marietta. She was the only one who treated the girl with genuine kindness, calling her my hidden flower. Mrs. Marietta taught her not only stitches and fabric cutting, but also small lessons in self-worth. Your beauty, child, is in the eyes, and those with good eyes see truly. Those were words Elisa kept close to her heart, like a blanket on a cold day. Adulthood came early. By 17, Elisa was sewing for much of the town. Simple clothes, mending tears, hemming skirts, making party dresses for the same girls who had mocked her years before, all with the same care and attention. But even being good at what she did, she was treated with indifference. Customers rarely met her eyes. Some avoided stepping into her small home, leaving fabrics at the gate instead. Her days were always the same, waking before sunrise, picking vegetables from her garden, heating black coffee, and sewing until her eyes ached. Elisa had no friends, no suitors. The few young men in town seemed to pretend she didn't exist, or worse, laughed behind her back when she walked through the market with her bags, her back curved. On her rare days off, she would sit under the shade of a tree in her yard, holding a second-hand book, her eyes lost in worlds where heroines were loved, where someone saw the heart behind the face. In those readings, Elisa would cry quietly, wishing that one day, someone might see her with that same gaze. But the real world was cruel. Some words cut like blades. Once, while trying to join a conversation with a group of women at the market, she overheard one of them murmur, "I don't understand how she has the nerve to go out looking like that." Elisa forced a faint smile, hiding the pain, but inside, she crumbled. In the mirror, she saw a tired woman. She took no pride in her looks. She always wore the same plain dresses, her hair twisted into a hurried bun. Her curved posture made it impossible to go unnoticed. Her eyes seemed to carry all the sadness in the world. But there was something in Elisa that even she did not recognize, a quiet strength, a dignity that not even rejection had managed to erase. At the local church, she was known as the strange sewing girl. The older women greeted her out of politeness. The young people pretended not to see her. Even so, Elisa attended every Sunday, sitting in the last pew, where no one had to look at her, and she didn't have to look at them. What she didn't know was that, in that same small town, there was another quiet soul carrying deep scars. A man who, like her, knew what it meant to live alone. A reclusive farmer, accustomed to the sound of the wind and the silence of the land. But that meeting was yet to come. For now, Elisa stitched her sorrows away, stitch by stitch, thread by thread, waiting, unknowingly, for the day destiny would embroider something new into her life. That night, after yet another exhausting day of sewing, Elisa blew out the oil lamp and lay down. Before closing her eyes, she whispered to herself, maybe tomorrow will be different. And it was. But not in the way she imagined. That morning, the sky was gray, heavy like Elisa's heart. She rose as usual, her muscles still aching from the day before. The light blue dress she had sewn so carefully for a customer was folded neatly, wrapped in a plastic cover to protect it from the rain that threatened to fall. This delivery was important, not only for the money, but because the customer had promised to recommend her to other women in town. With the dress in her arms and her hood pulled over her head, Elisa walked along the dirt roads, stepping around puddles and patches of mud. Her hunchback ached more on damp days, and the weight of the package threw her slightly off balance, but she kept going. She knew no one was waiting for her at home. She also knew that any flaw in that dress would be reason enough for fresh humiliation. And she already carried too many scars to collect more. She delivered the dress politely, received a brief thank you, and turned to leave for her next delivery. The rain was already falling in fine threads, soaking the ground and the hem of her dress. On the way back, she decided to cut through a narrow alley near the soccer field, hoping to shorten her route. That's when she heard the laughter. Look who it is. The village hunchback. Her body stiffened. The voices were young, familiar. 3 boys and a girl leaned under the awning of a closed grocery store, smoking and laughing. They were from her generation, maybe a year or 2 younger. Elisa knew them by sight, and they knew her more than she wished they did. She tried to walk past quickly, without responding, eyes fixed on the ground. "Hey, you deaf now?" one of them shouted, striding toward her. "What's that? A dress for a monster to wear?" Another came from behind and yanked the plastic bag from her hands. "Give it back," she cried, but her voice was drowned out by their laughter. One of the boys held the dress up, waving it like a flag. "Look at this, must be for some kind of horror show." And then, with a sharp, cruel tear, the fabric split. Elisa cried out, trying to stop them, but the girl in the group shoved her hard, sending her down to her knees in the mud. "Freak," the girl sneered. "You should hide yourself, not parade that hump around." The rain grew heavier. Elisa stayed there, hands filthy, the torn dress on the ground, her face completely soaked, with rainwater and tears. Her breathing was a tangle of anger and despair. It wasn't the first humiliation she had suffered. But this one, on this day, cut deeper. Because she had tried. She had sewn it perfectly, had prepared herself, had believed, and still, the world crushed her as if she were nothing. She got up with effort, her knees caked in mud. Ignoring the shouts and laughter behind her, she ran. She ran as if fleeing from an invisible storm. She ran with her soul bleeding. Her path took her far from the main road, to a forgotten field where there was only a broken fence and an old half-abandoned barn. There, alone, soaked and shivering with cold, she went inside. And for the first time in a long time, she screamed. A raw, hoarse, primal scream. A scream that seemed to tear from every part of her body. A scream that said, "Why?" She fell to her knees in the damp hay, buried her face in her hands and wept. Then she heard footsteps. Heavy, steady, coming from the back of the barn. The sound of worn boots on wooden boards rang firm and unhurried, as if each step carried an old story. Startled, Elisa scooted back a few inches, clutching her arms tightly around herself, trying to melt deeper into the shadows. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. But when she lifted her face, her eyes met another pair, dark, watchful, profoundly alive. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a firm stance, a few days' stubble on his jaw, and a weathered hat shadowing part of his face. He looked as though he'd been shaped by the land and by time. There was something quiet and restrained in his presence, as if he were made of the same rough, enduring wood that held that barn together. And yet, even in the dim light, there was something in his gaze that didn't frighten her. On the contrary, it calmed her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice deep, resonant, the kind that seems to come from somewhere deep in the soul. There was no hurry, no judgment. Only a quiet concern. Elisa hesitated. The words caught in her throat. She was drenched, mud clinging to her ankles, the dress torn, her face still streaked with tears. Her hunchback, always hidden by her hair and loose clothing, was now exposed. And she knew it. She knew that anyone else would look at her with pity, or worse, with disgust. But he didn't look away. She shook her head, unable to speak. Silence was all she could offer. She was exhausted, inside and out. He simply stepped closer, slowly, unhurried, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "Come with me," he said. "My place is warmer. I've got a clean blanket, and some coffee that might help stop that shivering." She blinked, surprised. No one had ever spoken to her like that. With such ease. With such humanity. She began, trying to refuse, but her voice came out as a choked whisper. The rain still poured outside, the cold was in her bones, and the dress clinging to her body no longer shielded even her soul. Miguel, because that's how he introduced himself next, simply didn't press her. He only tilted his chin toward the barn's side door. "It's your choice. But you shouldn't stay here like this. Not after whatever it is you've been through." There was firmness in his voice, but no force. A steady, welcoming strength. And Elisa, for the first time in a long while, wanted to trust. She rose unsteadily, her knees trembling. Miguel, without a word, extended his arm to help her. His touch was light, respectful, just enough to steady her steps. When they stepped inside his house, the contrast with the night's chill was immediate. The scent of dry wood, fresh brewed coffee, and bar soap filled her senses. A fire glowed in the corner, casting a soft light across the small, rustic room. Miguel pointed to a chair near the fire. "Sit there. I'll get the blanket." She obeyed in silence. Her hands still shook, and her eyes burned. Sitting there, in the fire's warmth, felt like sinking into an embrace the world had always denied her. Minutes later, he returned with a thick, clean, fresh-smelling blanket. And a towel. "Here. Dry your hair before you catch a fever." She took the fabric in both hands, her eyes fixed on him, as if trying to understand why someone would do this. Why someone like him didn't look at her the way everyone else did. "Why are you doing this?" she murmured, almost unintentionally. Miguel sat in a worn armchair across the room, staring at the fire for a moment before answering. "Because I know what it's like to feel like there's no place in the world for you." "My name is Miguel," he said after a long silence. His voice was low, as if it had been pulled from the earth itself, not from his chest. Elisa took a while to answer. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to vanish into that rain and never be seen again. But there was something about that man that dismantled her defenses without the slightest effort. "Elisa," she murmured, barely audible. Miguel nodded, as if accepting a secret. They stayed like that for a few more moments, not speaking, just listening, to the storm outside and to the silence inside. She didn't know it yet, but something rare was being born there. A connection not built on pretty words or promises, but on presence, on respect, on humanity. The rain kept hammering the tin roof as if the entire sky were crying for everything she had endured. Elisa curled up in her chair, the blanket wrapped around her fragile body. The heat from the fireplace was beginning to bring life back to her frozen fingers, and the shared silence between her and Miguel was as comforting as the blanket on her shoulders. After a few minutes, Miguel rose from his armchair, walked to the small kitchen, and began preparing something. Elisa followed his movements with her eyes, too shy to speak. She felt out of place, as though she didn't belong there, but at the same time, something deep inside her begged her to stay. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like an unwanted intruder. He set water to boil and broke 2 pieces of fresh bread, slicing some plain cheese he kept in a clay dish. In silence, Miguel placed everything on a tray and carried it to the small table near Elisa's chair. "It's not much, but it's warm," he said, pushing a cup of coffee toward her. She hesitated before accepting. She took the mug in both hands, feeling the heat spread into her fingers. When she took the first sip, her eyes closed on their own. The simple, strong taste of the coffee made her feel alive again. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure how to express anything more than that. "I should be the one thanking you for agreeing to come in," he replied with a faint, crooked smile. "I usually live alone. Sometimes I forget what it's like to hear another voice besides my own." Elisa bit into a piece of bread without a word, and felt a tear slide down her cheek before she could stop it. She tried to wipe it away discreetly, but Miguel saw. "Something happened today, didn't it?" She squeezed her eyes shut and lowered her head, trying to swallow the sobs. The blanket weighed on her shoulders, but not as heavily as the shame, the pain, the humiliation she had carried all her life, and which that afternoon had spilled over like the storm outside. They tore my dress. The one I made myself. Called me a freak. And they laughed at me. Laughed like I was some kind of monster. Her voice shook, breaking between sobs she could no longer contain. Miguel didn't say anything for a few seconds. But his eyes hardened, not with anger at her, but with anger at the world. At cruelty. At ignorance. That's not your fault, Elisa, he said firmly. People like that only see what's on the outside. But inside, you've got a strength most people don't have. She lifted her gaze slowly, surprised. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever looked past the hunch in her back, the plain clothes, the shame written on her face. You don't even know me. I already know enough, he said. I know the way you walked in here, not wanting to bother anyone. The way you held that cup like it was a treasure. The way you're trying to carry that pain all on your own. That says more than any conversation could. Elisa dropped her gaze again, unsure how to deal with such kindness. Part of her wanted to run, but another part wanted to stay, wanted to hear more, wanted to be seen like that again. Why do you live out here alone? Miguel drew in a deep breath. The question was simple, but the answer hurt more than he liked to admit. Because sometimes silence is less cruel than words. She understood. Understood in a way few people could. I lost my wife 5 years ago, he said, his voice deep and heavy, like the wet earth outside. It happened so fast. Just a mild fever. It turned into an infection, and before I knew it, she wasn't breathing anymore. Since then, I just stayed. Kept going. Took care of the land. Took care of the animals. But myself, no. Elisa felt a tightness in her chest. He looked so solid, so strong, yet inside, he carried a void so much like her own. I lost my mother when I was little. And my father, he never accepted me as I am. I guess I've always had this feeling of not belonging anywhere. Like the world was too big, and I was just a mistake left behind. Miguel looked at her with tenderness. This woman, curled under a blanket, had more courage in her heart than many who walked with their chests puffed out. You are not a mistake, Elisa. You never were. The words echoed inside her like a seed falling into fertile soil. For the first time, someone had said it with truth. No pretense. No pity. Just conviction. She felt her eyes fill with tears again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. Miguel stood up, grabbed a clean cloth, and knelt down before her. May I? She nodded, and with all the gentleness in the world, he wiped the tears from her face. The gesture was so tender it made her breath catch. You don't have to hide what you feel anymore, he said. Not here. Silence settled between them once again, but now it was different. It was a light, knowing silence, like that shared by two souls who, despite their wounds, recognize each other in the dark. Outside, the rain was beginning to ease. The drops slowed, as if even the sky had decided to give that night a moment of peace. Miguel glanced out the window, then turned back to her. Do you want to go home tonight? She hesitated. The thought of facing the road, the people, the stairs, was unbearable. But more than that, there was something here with Miguel she didn't want to lose. Can I stay a little longer? She asked, her voice timid. You can. Stay as long as you want, he answered firmly. Here, you don't have to run from anything. She smiled for the first time. And in that smile, crooked, uncertain, but genuine, Miguel saw the beauty the world had always refused to see. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, and for a moment, the house that had been just a shelter became a home. The rain, which had roared so fiercely for hours, finally began to relent. The drops lost their force, turning into a gentle drizzle that barely made a sound on Miguel's roof. The sky was still heavy, threatening to open up again, but the worst seemed to have passed. Elisa looked out the window, watching the soaked earth and the muddy path that would take her back home. Her heart tightened in her chest, and a knot of anxiety formed in her throat. I think the rain's passed, Miguel said, rising and walking to the door. He opened it, letting in the fresh scent of wet earth. "Do you need to go?" he asked, his eyes serious and concerned as they met hers. Elisa swallowed hard. She wanted to stay there, protected from the storm that wasn't just outside, but also inside her. But she knew she couldn't. Her life, harsh and lonely as it was in that little house. Those walls that, even empty of affection, were still her only home. "Yes," she answered, voice trembling. "I need to go back home." Miguel walked toward the stable, returning minutes later with an old but well-kept saddle. In the yard, a sturdy brown horse awaited them, its calm eyes watching their presence. "I can take you," he offered firmly. She hesitated, eyeing the animal, then his eyes, which reflected a sincerity she hadn't found in anyone else. "I can go by myself," she said, almost in a whisper, battling fear and wounded pride. "It's not safe," Miguel replied, voice low but unwavering. "The road is slippery, and night falls fast. You shouldn't take the risk." Elisa felt a chill run down her spine. She knew he was right. The loneliness of that road could be deadly, especially for a vulnerable woman unaccustomed to the darkness that always seemed to hide dangers. She took a deep breath and nodded, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. "Thank you," she said, a faint smile of gratitude lighting up her rain-streaked face. Miguel helped her mount the horse. His touch was brief, but the electricity of that unexpected contact passed between them both. He adjusted the blanket covering the animal, making sure she was shielded from the growing cold wind. "Hold on tight," he warned, mounting beside her. The horse took a few steps and soon they were plunged into the muddy path, night wrapping around them like a dark cloak. The silence was almost complete, broken only by the steady rhythm of hooves on wet earth and the whisper of wind through the trees. Elisa's body was tense, but Miguel's steady presence by her side gave her an unexpected sense of security. Along the way, Miguel cast her a quick glance, as if searching for the right words, but said nothing. Elisa understood that sometimes silence is the greatest act of care. When they neared her small house, a faint yellow candlelight flickered through the bedroom window. Her heart raced, a mix of relief and fear washed over her. Miguel dismounted first, offering his hand to help her down safely. The slippery ground made everything more dangerous. As soon as her feet touched the solid earth, Elisa turned to him, wanting to say something, but the words fled her. "Miguel," she began, her voice faltering. "Thank you for everything." He smiled, but there was a sad glint in his eyes. "Take care of yourself, Elisa. Don't let the world make you too small." She nodded, trying to hold on to that phrase like a precious treasure. She watched as he mounted the horse, the animal kicking up dust and mud in the damp night air. Until they disappeared around the bend, Miguel kept his eyes fixed on her, a final gesture of presence and protection. Alone, Elisa stood there, her hands trembling, her heart full of a tangled mix of hope and fear. And that night, for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so alone in this vast and relentless world. 3 days passed since that rainy night when Miguel took her home. Elisa could hardly focus on her work, her heart racing and her thoughts tangled around that strong, silent presence that somehow was beginning to fill the emptiness she'd carried for so long. That morning, as she sewed a simple dress for a neighbor, she heard a sound at the door, soft, hesitant footsteps. She looked up, and there he was, Miguel, standing in the doorway, carefully holding a bundle wrapped in an old but clean cloth. She swallowed hard, feeling a flutter in her stomach. Her face, already marked by years of sadness and rejection, flushed even deeper. "Good morning, Elisa," he said with a shy, almost rare smile that lit up his austere face. "I brought some clothes for you to sew." She averted her gaze, her heart pounding. For a moment, she wanted to hide behind the table, disappear as she usually did before stares. But Miguel didn't seem to expect that. He stayed calm, respectful. "Thank you," she murmured, nervously fixing a loose thread on the dress she held. I wasn't expecting this." He stepped forward, gently placing the bundle on the table. Elisa lifted her eyes and met his, deep, quiet, unlike any who had judged her before. Right there, in that simplicity, she felt truly seen. "I'll start right away," she said, with a slight smile, trying to hide the shyness that overwhelmed her. Miguel nodded and moved closer to the window so the sunlight could better illuminate the space. As she sorted the fabrics, he stood there silently, watching her in a way that made her feel strangely safe. There was a moment of comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of the needle-piercing fabric. "How's the garden?" Miguel asked, glancing outside as if needing to distract himself from his own shyness. "Growing," Elisa replied without stopping her stitching. "The neighborhood kids help sometimes." Miguel smiled, enchanted by the care she gave to the small things. "It's good to see life blooming," he said softly. She raised her eyes, and for a brief second, their gazes locked. Time seemed to slow, and the outside world vanished. Elisa felt her cheeks warm but didn't look away. There was something in that moment, a silent promise, a fragile hope blossoming between two wounded souls. As days passed, Miguel began appearing more often at Elisa's small house. No longer just delivering clothes to sew, but also bringing small gifts harvested straight from the farm, a bouquet of wildflowers, homemade jams made with fresh fruit, and sometimes baskets brimming with apples, pears, and strawberries he'd picked himself. Elisa was always surprised and a little shy at these unexpected gestures. No one had ever cared enough to think of her that way before. More than the gifts, it was the care and intention behind them that made her feel special. "I brought a little sunshine inside your home," Miguel would say with a subtle smile as he handed over a jar of jam. "Thank you, Miguel. You always find a way to surprise me," Elisa replied, her eyes shining with emotion. As his visits became more frequent, their conversations grew lighter, filled with spontaneous laughter that filled the house with life and warmth. Miguel, once reserved and serious, began revealing a more relaxed side, charming Elisa with funny stories from farm life or his clumsy attempts to teach her some simple sewing tasks. Elisa, for her part, found her smile returning effortlessly, brightening a face marked by the hardships of her past. One afternoon, as they sewed a blanket for the barn together, Miguel pulled the thread harder than he should have, causing the thimble to slip from his fingers and roll across the floor. They looked at each other and burst into laughter, a deep, soul-cleansing laugh that seemed to wash away all the sadness they'd been carrying. "You're a disaster," Elisa teased, wiping tears caused by laughter. "But a disaster who learned how to make jam," he replied, a spark lighting up his eyes. Those small exchanges became the foundation of a friendship growing strong and delicate, woven between threads of sewing and the sense of the earth. More than companions, they were becoming a family, a safe refuge against a world that had so often rejected them. And in that simple meeting, with hands brushing as they passed fabric, shared knowing glances, and laughter between them, Elisa felt a hope blooming inside her that she had never imagined possible. That maybe, finally, she could be loved for who she truly was. The sky carried heavy clouds that morning, as if nature itself was bracing for the storm about to form inside Elisa's heart. She had never gone to town to sell the farm's products with Miguel, and honestly, the idea terrified her. Especially knowing that, in the small community, judgment and cruelty could be lurking, ready to strike. Still, there was a faint thread of hope pushing her forward. Miguel had gently invited her, insisting that her help would be valuable and that he wouldn't leave her alone for a moment. Elisa wore the best dress she had, simple but clean, sewn by her own hands. She spent hours getting ready, her heart a mix of anxiety and insecurity. Her face, with the hump that always made her feel different, seemed heavier in the mirror's reflection. Her hands trembled as she fixed her hair into a discreet bun. When they arrived at the town square, it buzzed with people, voices, colors, and smells. It was a strange energy for Elisa, used to the silence and open space of the farm. The murmur of the crowd was almost deafening to her. Miguel sat up by the stall with the fruits, cheeses, and homemade jams, while Elisa helped carefully arrange the products. The sweet scent of ripe fruit mingled with the aroma of earth dampened by the previous night's rain. She tried to focus but couldn't stop watching the people around her, who suddenly began to look at her differently. First came the whispers, low and quick. "That's her, isn't it?" someone whispered. "Look how she walks," another voice murmured, full of contempt. Elisa felt her body stiffen. Each word was an invisible arrow piercing her soul. The gazes weighed down like stones on her bent shoulders. Her steps slowed, as if trying to sink into the ground and disappear. Then a group of youths approached. The leader, a boy with a malicious smile and cold eyes, stopped right in front of her. "Hey, farmer," he shouted. "Desperate to hang around someone like that? Looks like you're the only one who doesn't see what everyone's talking about." Elisa felt her face burn. Tears threatened to fall, but her mouth was too dry to make a sound. Her whole body wanted to run, to escape that stage of humiliation. Miguel stepped forward, firm as a rock in a storm. "That's enough," he said, voice low and commanding. "Shut up now." The young man sneered, but before he could reply, Miguel looked at him with a gaze that brooked no argument. "Elisa is a brave woman. She fights more battles in a day than you can imagine in your whole life. You have no right to disrespect her or anyone else." The silence fell heavy in the air. The youth looked away, ashamed, while the others were left speechless. Elisa felt her heart pound hard and, for the first time in a long while, saw herself not as a target, but as someone worthy of respect. Miguel reached out his hand to her, and she took it, feeling a different warmth, the warmth of protection. As they packed up the stall, the cruel words echoed in her mind. The humiliation didn't disappear just because someone defended her, and that made her want to hide even more. When they neared her home, Elisa pulled away slightly, staring at the ground. "Miguel, she began, voice trembling. "I think I can't keep doing this. Us." He looked at her, worried but patient. "Why?" She sighed, looking at the darkening sky. "Because I'm not like the others. I'm different. I'm the reason for the laughs, the jokes. I don't want to go through that anymore. I want to disappear." Miguel cupped her face in his hands, holding her firmly but gently. "Elisa, look at me," he asked. "You're beautiful. Beautiful in a way only I can see." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down. "I've never had anyone look at me like that." He wiped her tears with his thumb, kissing her cheek softly. "I'll be here, no matter what they say. I choose you. Your strength, your courage, your unique way." She opened her eyes and saw there the purest sincerity she had ever known. Their lips met in a kiss full of promises and healing, a kiss that dissolved the darkness of years and ignited a bright light for the future. When they parted, she smiled, finally feeling the weight of rejection lighten. "Thank you," she murmured, "for showing me that I can be loved." Miguel smiled. "Always, Elisa. Always." From that day forward, everything changed for Elisa. The farm, once silent and lonely, transformed into a place where soft laughter echoed through the mornings, where the sound of footsteps walking side by side filled the air with new hope. The wind seemed to carry a different song, a melody of rebirth and peace. The days, once marked by an almost mechanical routine, became light and full of meaning. Elisa, who not long ago felt her body weary and her soul oppressed, discovered strength within herself she never imagined she possessed. Every morning she woke with a timid smile, and while tending the garden, felt the damp earth beneath her hands, a sensation that brought comfort and connected her to life. She sewed with dedication, threads and needles guided by a silent passion, restoring fabrics and, in the process, restoring herself. Miguel, with his steady and patient presence, stayed by her side, not only sharing chores but building with her a home where acceptance and love were the strongest foundations. One morning, while the sun was still low in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gold, they decided to restore an old barn that lay forgotten on the property. The space, once abandoned and covered in dust and cobwebs, would be transformed into a studio for Elisa. The first days of work were intense and full of effort. Together, Miguel and Elisa raised the barn's walls with firm and careful hands, painted every corner with meaningful strokes, and repaired the roof that would finally protect not only materials and fabrics but also dreams, hopes, and a future that once seemed out of reach. With every nail hammered, every piece of wood trimmed, they felt they weren't just rebuilding the barn, they were rebuilding their lives, brick by brick, stitch by stitch. Elisa spent hours in that space, surrounded by colorful fabrics, shining threads, and needles that traced more than just clothes. They traced stories. Stories of herself, of Miguel, of the neighborhood children, and of many others who, like them, sought a place to belong, a place to be seen and loved for who they truly were. Soon, word of Elisa's studio spread throughout the region. Women and men from nearby towns began traveling to order exclusive, custom-made dresses, crafted with a delicacy and care that only Elisa could provide. Each piece carried the seamstress's soul, a touch of magic that enchanted everyone who wore it. The studio became a surprising success, and the small farm transformed into a vibrant meeting place. People arrived full of anticipation, admiring not only Elisa's creations but the visible transformation in the woman who, once invisible, now shone with her own light. The neighborhood children, who had once only peeked from afar, started frequenting the place as if it were a playground. They ran through the fields, laughed in the blooming gardens, and often brought friends to see the farm's new rhythm. For Elisa, seeing those children happy was a joy that warmed her heart and healed old wounds. Neighbors began to approach more often, drawn by the new energy and the vibration of hope radiating from that place. And Elisa, who once avoided gazes and hid in her shyness, started greeting visitors at the market with her head held high, an open smile, and the confidence of someone who had discovered her worth, not because someone told her, but because she felt that strength growing with every beat of her heart. She still carried the scar of the hump, the visible mark of a life of struggles and rejection, but now it was a symbol of victory, of a silent battle won with each new dawn. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but transformed into a force that propelled her forward. Miguel, in turn, changed more than he had ever imagined. The man who once shut himself away in the silence of the mountains, hiding his feelings behind a stern face and few words, discovered the warmth of true love. In every glance shared with Elisa, in every touch, he felt more alive, more whole, more strong. They began sharing secrets and plans, dreams and fears. They would sit on mild nights on the porch of the house, watching the stars and talking about a future that once seemed unimaginable but now felt possible. A future built together, with intertwined hands and synchronized hearts. One of those nights, under the soft moonlight, Miguel surprised Elisa with a small wooden box, simple but full of meaning. In the quiet garden where the flowers Elisa had planted danced in the breeze, he knelt before her, holding her hands with gentleness and firmness. "Elisa," he said, voice choked with emotion, "you've changed my life in a way I never thought possible. With you, I've learned what it truly means to love. Will you marry me and continue this journey side by side?" The tears that ran down her face weren't of sadness, but of a deep and genuine joy. With the most sincere smile she had ever worn, she answered between sobs, "Yes, Miguel, I do." The children, watching hidden behind the window, ran out to embrace them, filling the air with laughter, hope, and contagious happiness. In that moment, it seemed as if the earth itself celebrated alongside them, as if the winds carried melodies of a love that had overcome all barriers. The farmer who once closed himself off in silence now had a life full of colors, laughter, and love. Elisa, who had always lived on the margins, had finally found her place in the sun, embraced by a love that saw beyond appearances, that recognized the beauty of the heart and treasured every scar as a chapter of the story. Because true love is not perfection, it is deep acceptance, seeing the other fully, without trying to change them. And together, Miguel and Elisa proved that life can bloom even where once there was only pain and rejection. That scars carry stories of overcoming, and that love has the power to transform not just people, but entire destinies. In that simple home, yet brimming with life, they wrote a new chapter, a chapter of hope, courage, true and unbreakable love. And so, day by day, brick by brick, stitch by stitch, they built a story that no one could ever erase.